With that, welcome to Inside this midweek edition of Big Ten Today. Rick Pizzo, Anthony Herron here at our Big Ten Network set. I'm still trying to digest this Paul Chryst news a few days after it happened.
Surprising, even shocking for a lot of folks. When you think about the success he had had there. I was just in Madison calling that game a few days ago. Certainly caught me off guard. I think everyone was maybe a little bit downtrodden after the Ohio State result, but I don't think they expected what happened.
Obviously, much more on that conversation, the road ahead for Jim Leonhard as well. But first, we introduce the third member of today's Big Ten Today crew, he being senior writer Pat Forde of Sports Illustrated. Pat, any truth to the rumor that your contract includes a huge buyout that does not allow midseason firings?
I wish it included a huge buyout, period. You can fire me anytime with that. I would be okay with that, but no such truth there. But boy, a lot of upheaval in the Big Ten West. Other than Illinois, I don't know who's happy.
A lot of upheaval really in college football with nearly a half dozen midseason firings already, and that is where we begin today with our big story, the dismissal of Paul Chryst on Sunday. Chris McIntosh making that announcement and, of course, naming Jim Leonhard as the interim head coach for the Badgers. Played safety at Wisconsin in the early 2000s, was a three-time first-team All-American, Wisconsin born and bred from Ladysmith, played in the NFL for 10 years, then was hired by Paul Chryst with basically no coaching experience at all to be the DB coach. Did so well, he became the defensive coordinator and has done an amazing job there, was a Broyles Award finalist as quickly as 2017. So there's no doubt the trajectory has been rising for Jim Leonhard. But this has to be, Anthony, a tough spot because Jim admitted, listen, I have the ultimate respect and the gratitude for Paul because he gave me my first opportunity. And it really did truly seem like even he was surprised by the move that Wisconsin decided to make.
It's awkward. It's awkward for a lot of folks there right now because there is so much football left to coach, so much football left to play. Like I went through coaching transition at Iowa. I had my first 2 years there with Hayden Fry, my last 2 years there with Kirk Ferentz. But at least that happened over the offseason when Hayden Fry retired. You did have an opportunity to digest things, to get to know what the new look of Hawkeye football would be. Now, this is in the midst of the season. Now, Jim Leonhard is very familiar with the roster, certainly and obviously on the defensive side of the football, but there will be a transition now for him addressing the entirety of that team and for the players and viewing Jim Leonhard in this different capacity now because there's still a competitive roster that's there in Madison.
And Pat, I think this is very different than what happened in Lincoln because everyone there, I think the players as well, knew that Scott Frost was on thin ice. They weren't shocked when that happened. I think this is surprising for a lot of the players that Paul Chryst recruited. I mean, your latest article describes Chryst as being more Wisconsin than cheese curds and bratwurst, which I completely agree with. And so the players now have to deal with a new guy in charge and the fact that I don't really think they saw this coming.
Oh, I am sure they didn't. There was no buzz or anything out there, going into the season or even through the first few weeks, which did not go well. But still, I don't think anybody other than maybe a few disgruntled fans out there was saying, Paul Chryst has got to go. There was no real, subterranean intelligence out there that he was on thin ice. I think you could look and say you're probably heading towards staff changes at the end of the year. So this was a shocker. I have to admit, I was not a big fan of the move. I thought Paul Chryst probably deserved better given everything he has put into Wisconsin football for his entire life. But the move is now made. Jim Leonhard is really popular there. He does have a difficult job, as you said. This is sudden change stuff, right? Defensive coordinators coach sudden change. You got to react. You got to be ready to things when they don't go well. He's now dealing with big-time sudden change on a grand scale with the whole team.
And, Pat, one thing that's intriguing about it as well is that I think that when Chris McIntosh recently took over as the athletic director and he worked under Barry Alvarez, there was sort of this assumption that he was just an extension of Barry Alvarez and maybe would just operate in the exact same way that Barry Alvarez has. And this is probably our first look at a level of agency that Chris McIntosh has as the AD and the future that he sees for Wisconsin athletics, for Wisconsin football, and now this hire, what this means moving forward. This is really the first big salvo for him in making a decision that will resonate moving forward for the entire athletic department.
Well, let's go to the immediate future then. And the first challenge that Jim Leonhard faces on the field, you would think, listen, a road trip to Northwestern is probably a pretty good schedule deal for Leonhard in his first game as head coach, but he is also dealing with these expectations, and he is well aware that this basically amounts to a half-season-long audition to see whether he's the head coach full-time of the Badgers in 2023.
And with that in mind, you would imagine, because his name has been one that's begun to kind of circle through the ringer when jobs open up, when prominent gigs are happening, Jim Leonard's name is one that's begun to get mentioned here. But then you think about the fact that he was surprised by this, like we referenced earlier. So how much of this has necessarily been something he's been able to plan for as this season's Wisconsin head coach? It's a really awkward balance I think he'll have to strike. He's very capable of striking that, of being a formidable presence in front of this roster. But everyone in there, I would imagine, is still hurting, is still sort of healing. And Jim Leonard even addressed that to the media, healing after this sort of sudden news and surprise from Sunday.
And let's be honest, Jim Leonard is truly still in the infancy of his coaching career. So, Pat, with that knowledge in hand, what becomes the toughest challenge for Leonard going from D.C. to being the guy in the front of every single room for the rest of the way?
I think it's going to have to be familiarizing himself and finding some authority with the offense. He has been probably in his silo on defense, and he's done a very good job, although this has probably been his worst defense so far. They're 10th in the Big Ten in yards allowed per play, 8th in yards allowed per game, but still, that's been his baby. Now, look, you've got to, especially without Paul Chryst there, who was an offensive guy, you've got to be involved in the offense. Like, at least, hey, what are we thinking here? What are our plans? Look at some film of opposing defenses and say, this I think we could take advantage of, that we could take advantage of. Personnel on that side of the ball, special teams. There's just a lot more to be responsible for. And then standing up also and talking to the media. As you guys have mentioned, like, Jim Leonard's name has been out there as a possible head coach candidate for a couple of years. So he's probably got some thoughts in his head. This is how I would like to run a program. These are things I would do if I get my chance. He's just gotten his chance maybe a little faster than was expected.
And up to this point, he knows basically one way to operate. And it's one thing to sort of plan for it, to plot what your time as head coach would begin to look like. But when you think about the future of Wisconsin athletics, guys, I mean, this is a situation where they're going to need to figure out. Now, I do think it's worthy of mentioning what I think is a misnomer that's out there a little bit about recruiting, and if that's been an issue. From 2019 to 2021, that was the best 3-year stretch of recruiting, of just sheer talent, accumulation of talent in the history of Wisconsin football. So Paul Chryst, for Badger standards, was recruiting at a high level. The 2022 cycle basically went back to what was the case before that, before 2019. But on the whole, they had gotten talent in there. The development of that talent is an issue. So Chris McIntosh, AD, and now Jim Leonard, interim head coach, how do they maybe formulate a plan for how Wisconsin football develops the talent moving forward? What does the structure of recruiting look like moving forward? Does Jim Leonard even kind of know what that looks like yet? That's a part of not only the management of the game plan on the field on game days, but I would imagine as this, I think it's fair to call it an audition, plays out, can he sort of present that to Chris McIntosh in an image that he thinks makes sense?
Now, one of the interesting discussions that I think this brings about is, does Wisconsin have to modernize offensively? There's been a lot of talk about the fact that the kind of offense that Wisconsin and Iowa in that same division runs doesn't really work in today's world of college football. Iowa was in the Big Ten championship game a year ago, and I know they got run out of the building by Michigan, but they got there. And so the question then becomes, are we not just looking at a personnel change, but are we looking at a holistic change in the way that Wisconsin is going to operate? And to your point, then it changes the way that Wisconsin is going to recruit.
And I think, and Pat can certainly speak to this as well, because the Nebraska job obviously recently came available as well. And Nebraska is a program that had begun to try and modernize offensively and run a lot of RPOs and have the spread option and get out in space. And as Scott Frost was relieved of his duties, the immediate discussion about Nebraska was, well, you're in the Big Ten West. You got to get better on the line of scrimmage. You got to coach fundamentals, because that's what's led Wisconsin and Iowa, and now an emerging Minnesota program, to success within that division. So I don't know, Pat, that there's necessarily one way to kind of skin that cat to go about it, just depending on whether or not Chris McIntosh believes what modernizing Wisconsin football really looks like moving forward.
I agree with you, Anthony. I'm not sure I would say this means you need to just change your identity. Wisconsin football has been very successful, incredibly consistent, playing a certain brand of football. They have recruited to that brand. It's worked largely pretty well. Maybe Graham Mertz was a very highly recruited quarterback, and maybe his tenure so far hasn't been quite what people maybe dreamed of, but that, they've recruited awfully well at the running back position, at the offensive line position for many, many years. I don't think you necessarily throw out the baby with the bathwater here and say, we got to do it this other way. Obviously, that'd be up to whoever the next coach is, whether it's Jim Leonhard full-time, whether they go get a Lance Leipold or somebody like that. What fits them? But in terms of program identity, I'm not sure I would be rushing to change things when it's been awfully successful.
Pat, I do want to touch on one topic quickly before we leave the Wisconsin coaching job, because it is more about Wisconsin. It is really about college coaching as a whole. Your latest article described it as silly money, because that's basically what buyouts have become at this juncture. It almost doesn't matter. There is no changing this trend. This is the way that it is going to be. Does that mean we're going to see more and more of these mid-season firings? Because it's not just a lack of patience. I think Scott Frost was given the amount of time. Paul Chryst was obviously there for parts of 8 different seasons. But are these mid-season firings now the new trend in college coaching?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the last 3 years they have picked up. Last year there was several. This year, as you noted, we've had at least one every week since the second week of the season. So that's here to stay, unless they change the recruiting calendar. And there has been some discussion about that, Rick. But the December signing period and also the transfer portal windows dictate a lot of when you feel like you've got to have the next guy on board. To try to either save a recruiting class, build a recruiting class, save kids from going into the portal, whatever the case may be. That's kind of what has driven a lot of this. If they move the signing period to, say, March or April, that might alleviate some of this rush. But the way things are, with the money involved, the urgency, in some cases the panic, I don't think we're going back. I think you're just seeing people spending more money, making more changes more quickly, more abruptly, and that's not changing.
I mean, Nebraska fired Scott Frost 2 weeks prior to them saving, $7 million? And It was literally a drop in the bucket. That around here is what we call Anthony Herron money. Rick Pizzo rejoined by Anthony Herron and Pat Forde. Pat, I want to start with Saturday's late game. It's prime time in Champaign. Illinois just laid it on Wisconsin. Brett Bielema takes his team up to Madison. They win there for the first time in 2 decades. And this Illinois team right now appears to have it going on both sides of the football. Chase Brown can run it. Ryan Walters is one of the best young defensive coordinators in all of college football. And with Iowa's struggles offensively, Illinois installed as a big-time favorite at home on Saturday.
I love this Illini team. I mean, they've been a great story. Well, I think maybe the best story so far in the Big Ten. You love to see the programs that have been down for quite a while kind of have that breakthrough. And I think this is validated all the more every week. The hiring of Brett Bielema, coming back to the Big Ten, into his comfort zone, and getting his brand of ball established, but with a little bit of tweaks. They've got a little bit more punch in the passing game than maybe some of his past teams do. But you mentioned Chase Brown, phenomenal player, and he has just thrived in that offense. They're moving people for him. He's breaking tackles. For my money, maybe the best running back in the country right now. You mentioned Ryan Walters. Boy, is his name going to be hot in the coaching carousel at the end of this season here. He's done a brilliant job coordinating that defense. So I look at Illinois, and I'm just excited about where the program has gotten to and where they can possibly continue going. They look like the team to beat in the Big Ten West to me.
It feels like they're this year's Michigan State of last year. I called the Spartans game last season in week 2, and I left East Lansing that day saying, man, this Michigan State squad is for real. And calling Illinois the last 2 weeks, feel the exact same way. This is a legitimate squad with championship-level potential from a conference perspective, and they're getting better each week. Like Tommy DeVito, Brett Bielema talked about taking his offensive line coach because he hadn't hired Barry Lenny yet, but once Tommy DeVito entered the transfer portal, he went and visited that quarterback and said, we could use you for this program. And he laid out the design for how Tommy DeVito would be protected in a way that he wasn't necessarily protected when he was the quarterback for Syracuse, and getting the ball out on time, in rhythm, with accuracy, and also having some mobility and utilizing the up-tempo approach that Barry Lenny has now brought to Champaign. It just suits their quarterback, but it's not all on him, to Pat's point, where Chase Brown has been able to be the leading rusher in America. And Josh McCray isn't even back healthy yet, but he's getting close. This is a team that's playing at a high level on each side of the football, not completely shocked by the defense, but I don't see another better one in the Big Ten at the moment. But this offense and the versatility that they deploy, this is really what makes them, I think, a Big Ten West frontrunner at the moment.
Share one thought on your alma mater. Do you feel better about Iowa's offense after what they've done the last couple of weeks?
I do. I mean, you got to view it through the prism of how bad they were on offense earlier in the season. The passing game, with a little bit of additional health at receiver, with the offensive line beginning to improve, it's still the bottom rushing attack in the Big Ten. You're not accustomed to seeing Iowa down there. But with that being said, we are seeing Spencer Petras begin to throw the football with more conviction, begin to be able to connect with some of these young and inexperienced receivers like Brody Brecht, who's starting to make a couple of plays, having Nico Ragaini back in the lineup as well for the Hawkeyes. So the rushing attack, as that grows, should just make Iowa a more well-rounded offense. But I'm still looking at both these defenses thinking points are going to be hard to come by.
Iowa, Illinois, 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 local time from Champaign. You can see it right here on the Big Ten Network. Ohio State hits the road for the first time. That's the tough part of this game. The part that seems to favor the Buckeyes, their passing attack against Michigan State's secondary.
Yeah,
Pat, when you start to look at the strengths and weaknesses of these two teams right now, it seems, at least on paper, to be a big-time mismatch.
Yeah, if they, it's a bad matchup for the Spartans unless they can really circle the wagons and fix a few things week over week. But that pass defense has been struggling for a year and a half now, and that's not the team you want to see in that situation in Ohio State because they're just so explosive there. Again, we still haven't had a Jackson Smith-Njigba, explosion, and they're still just incredibly prolific without him being the player that we know he can be. They've just got so many other weapons there. C.J. Stroud's operating on a super high level, and they have great balance. That's the thing, too. They have just been able to run the ball extremely well, so it's not even like you can load up one way or the other against them and hope to stop them because they can do whatever they really want to do on offense.
I do think there are a couple of areas where Michigan State can go into this game and say if we focus on improvement in key spots, maybe we got a chance to hang with the Buckeyes. Peyton Thorne was one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the country last season. Turnovers in the passing game have been far too many for the Spartans this year. I believe that's where they can rein things in a bit. Running the football at a higher level, it sounds great. I'm not completely confident that they'll be able to do that without throwing the ball with more efficiency and more effectively. On the defensive side, though, that defensive front, I think they can hit blocks at a higher level. We see it happen at times in East Lansing. It's just been very inconsistent. But they do have guys who can be competitive on the line of scrimmage. If you can stymie that Ohio State rushing attack, doesn't necessarily mean you want to face C.J. Stroud and those wide receivers, but you can make them one-dimensional if you do that. On the back end, it's probably asking a lot to presume Michigan State's going to play at a much higher level in the secondary, though.
I just have an issue with Michigan State's offense being able to do what it did a year ago because there's no Kenneth Walker back there. Right. Jalen Berger's a very good back. Broussard can break some runs. But at the end of the day, when Michigan State made a mistake, they had the ultimate eraser in Kenneth Walker offensively. So they didn't have to ask Peyton Thorne to make the same kind of throws they're asking him to make right now. And when you go to play against Ohio State, you understand you probably have to score 40 to have any chance. I think this Buckeye defense is kind of overlooked. Jim Knowles has done a really nice job. It's a really complex defense. They figured out a way to get it done. It's Ohio State, Michigan State, first road trip of the year for the Buckeyes, 4 o'clock Eastern, coming up on Saturday at Spartan Stadium. OSU, by the way, 25 straight against unranked teams. And my favorite stat, 2 more touchdowns. C.J. Stroud, second most in Ohio State history. Guy just started his career.
He just became the starter.
All right, from one good quarterback to another really good quarterback, that being Taulia Tagovailoa, who I think may be the most indispensable player in the Big Ten because this Maryland offense is completely different if he's not taking the snap. They host Purdue. You'll call this game Saturday, noon Eastern on Big Ten Network. This, to me, is a sneaky good game, not just in the Big Ten, but nationally this weekend.
Without a doubt. And the way that the Boilermakers were able to pull that off last week wasn't because Jeff Brom in the passing attack got Aiden O'Connell back into the lineup and then started to throw the ball all over the yard. This was a run game for Purdue that made this happen up against one of the best defenses, one of the best run defenses in college football on the road. They began the game in the I formation. I've never seen Jeff Brom open a football game with a fullback in front of a tailback behind a quarterback and go downhill at an opponent.
Jeff Brom believes there's only 4 vowels. I doesn't even exist in his alphabet.
Right, and somehow they were able to use that formula. They stymied Minnesota's rushing attack, and then had their own rushing attack for the second week in a row, a walk-on running back. This time, it was Devin Mockabee who was able to step into the lineup, rush for over 100 yards, and that formula led Purdue to a win. And so reining in the offense a little bit as Aiden O'Connell returns from being banged up, that's the formula right now for Purdue. Can you get away with that on the road, though, in College Park, with all that weaponry that Mike Loxley, Talia Tagovailoa, all those wide receivers have at their disposal? I'm not sure that formula will work as well this Saturday.
Pat, I'm admittedly more fired up than most people for this game. Is my excitement warranted?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think we got a chance for an old-fashioned shootout here. I know Purdue's defense has shown some real flourishes, and they did last week against Minnesota, but this is a much tougher challenge, I think, with the Maryland passing game. So I want to see both these quarterbacks go back and sling it. I want to see the play callers and coordinators say, you know what, yeah, that's our real calling card here. Let's chuck it back and forth. Let's go up and down the field. Let's play 40-35, and whoever has the ball last wins. Let's see it. Come on.
Sounds like the Rose Bowl a year ago.
And real implications. For Purdue, can they stay in the West picture? Maryland, in theory, has an opportunity here to maybe run off a number of victories in a row. I would assume they're favored in this game at home. So it's an opportunity for both teams to really see if October could be a month where they start to separate themselves.
I think there's a very real possibility that Maryland, after that October 22nd game against Indiana, because I think they'll be favored in each of the next couple of weeks, you could be looking at a 6-1, maybe even 7-1 Maryland team late in the year. And I understand at that point you've only played Michigan. You haven't dealt with Ohio State yet. You haven't dealt with Penn State yet. Mm-hmm. But that would certainly be some pretty high water for Maryland to be stepping in after getting to the postseason a year ago. And I love their approach this year. Mike Loxley and every player on that team said last year's last year, man. We're not worried about a bowl game. We want a lot more for this team. And right now they're proving that is a real possibility. Purdue, Maryland kicks off our Big Ten Network triple header on Saturday. Comes to you noon Eastern from College Park. Back on Big Ten today, and a really cool look at today's big stat. Blake Corum moving up the list of highest yards per rush in Michigan program history. Recently passing Denard Robinson, Corum averaging basically 6.25 yards per tote. Has a chance, continuing on this trajectory, to be the all-time leader in this category in Michigan history. And with that in mind, it is time for today's big interview. You may have guessed it. Michigan running back Blake Corum is kind enough to join us. Hey, Blake, I know it's been a very busy fall for you already. You're proving that you most certainly can be an every down back. How's that body feeling at this point in the year?
Body feels great, just taking care of it, eating the right things, getting a lot of sleep, getting a lot of treatment. Body feels great.
Now, we saw this coming last year, but you certainly split some time with Hassan Haskins, and you were slowed down by that late season injury. Do you feel like in 2022 you're kind of making up for lost time a little bit?
Oh, most definitely. The coaches have been giving me the opportunity to carry the ball and really just getting the rhythm of things. Definitely feel like I've been making up some time for, the couple games I lost last year.
So when you start to look at what you've changed in terms of your body, your preparation, the way you got ready for this year, what exactly did you do?
I went to the film room. I looked at where I can get better, right? So how can I become more explosive? All right, now, okay, let me do some squats, Let me squat a little more. Let me deadlift a little more. All right, how can my vision get better? All right, so I'm going to do these drills. And then with being more explosive, how can I be more durable, right? So we put on a little bit of weight. And so really just, critiquing everything from my freshman year and then my sophomore year last year, and just really seeing how I can get better, become a better player, athlete, all the above.
You talk about putting on a little bit more weight. Now, you get to my age, you get to like your late 40s, it's really easy to do that, but it's not the kind of weight that you want. I know you wanted a specific type of weight, you wanted it in a specific place to do very specific things. So how did you accomplish that?
I really, we do these things called body compositions where, it measures your body fat and your weight and things like that. And so, I got that back, and they told me I could add a little bit of weight in my trunk. In my traps, the arms were pretty good. And so then you go attack it, right? So you make sure, you eat the right nutrition, when you do these certain types of lifts, maybe stay after and do a little more, get a little more volume. And so really just the body composition helped the whole thing. where I could add the weight and make sure it's good weight, right? You know, you don't want to add a whole bunch of fat. You know, I wanted it to be muscle and just be compact. You know, so that's where I went with it.
I love it. Good weight, good start for both you and the team. So you're unbeaten. You have more rushing touchdowns than any other player in the country. What are you happiest with right now from both a team and an individual perspective?
I'm just happy with the camaraderie of the team, right? So we'll just start with the offensive line. They're clicking, man. I tell you, I have the best offensive line in the country. They make my job easy. And then you go to the tight ends. Oh, they're blocking their butts off. They're catching balls. You know, they're just a great tight end group. You know, they go hard every play. They don't take a snap off. Receivers, very explosive, whether it's blocking, catching balls as well. And then, you know, JJ, you know, he's stepped up. I see growth every week, every practice in his play. And then, you know, with the running backs, you know, we have a great running back room, myself, Donovan Edwards, you know, CJ Stokes, Javier Dunlap. So, you know, we have a great offense, very explosive offense. And so I'm really just happy with how we're clicking. You know, I could go on with the defense as well. The defense is clicking as well. But, you know, team-wise, we're playing for each other. And, you know, we're willing to go to war for each other. Individually, I feel like, you know, I'm running pretty hard. You know, I feel like I'm getting a lot of 8-man boxes. You know, they're stacking the box. But, you know, with the offensive line's help and the tight end's help, we're allowing to get these one-on-one matchups. And so that's where individually I'm happy. You know, I'm running pretty hard, showing people. A lot of people didn't think I could, you know, I was that bruiser. But I'm able to show that a little bit this year, along with, you know, breaking some long runs and doing the same things I did last year. So, yeah, I mean, I'm a happy man right now, you know. The team's playing good, we're winning. When you're winning, you know, everyone's happy. So it's a beautiful thing.
I want to dive into some of those position groups a little bit deeper. I'm going to start with that offensive line because that's where you started. You got to give those guys a ton of credit. Now, listen, offensive linemen, they're a different breed. We understand they have a very different personality. What's the personality like of this offensive line? Because it is different than the one which won the Joe Moore Award as the nation's top O-line a year ago.
Yeah, you know, it's different, but it's also the same thing, right? It's the same goal at the end of the day. A lot of the guys did return. You know, we lost V, our center, and Stuber, our right tackle. Then we added Olu, you know, transferred from Virginia. Great add-on, man. I tell you, he's really smart. You know, he's really strong, and he's one hell of a center. And then Trente, right tackle. And then other than that, you know, it's the same offensive line. But, you know, when you have an offensive line coach like Coach Moore that, you know, pushes those guys and, you know, helps change their mindset and things like that, I mean, you can't go wrong. They believe in smashing. And so when you have guys that believe in smashing in front of you, and you know that's what they're going to do, it's a beautiful thing to see because you know you're going to be good because they're going to be smashing everyone that comes in your way.
Now, I know in the NFL, those offensive linemen expect the running backs and the quarterbacks to take them out to big steak dinners. Used to be that wasn't the case in college, but now the NIL money's starting to flow. They asking you for a couple of nights out or what?
Nah, you know, they don't ask me for a couple nights out, but, you know, I give my guys right, you know. I get them right here. I give them some things, you know, maybe give them some food, maybe give them a little bit of, give them a little bit of chicken. But you know, they don't ask for much. But you know, I make sure my guys are right. But yeah, most definitely.
Hey, Blake, you're going to hear this a lot if you keep this up, the talk about whether you will be in the race to get to New York for the Heisman. And I know you're not focused on that right now. I read an interview this week. You said, listen, it's cool, but I'm worried right now about Indiana. I'm worried about the success of this team. How do you start to handle that? Because you know as well as I do that it's going to creep in more and more if you keep playing like this.
Yeah, you know, I just make sure my mindset's the same. You know, the goal is the goal, and that's the win it all, right? So I know if the goal is to go and we win it all, there's a good chance, you know, I may be in New York. But like I said, I'm not focused on that. I'm focused day to day, week to week. You know, how can I get better each week? You know, how can the team get better each week? How can we improve? And how can we just better each other? Because I always say, like, with team success comes individual success. And I strongly believe that. So, like I say, yeah, it's cool. But say it does, you know, creep in more and more, like you say, I'm tuning it out, man. Because at the end of the day, all the football awards at the end of the year, they come at the end of the year for a reason. You know, they don't give you Game 6 awards, right? So whoever wins it at the end of the season, they deserve it. But in the meantime, you know, I'm just ready to work. You know, I'm ready to keep going. I'm ready for Indiana and the games after that. It's just a day-to-day thing, honestly, and just focusing on that end goal.
And I know your coach, Jim Harbaugh, said he's not worried about it because you're so mature in the way you handle all this outside stuff. It doesn't really affect the way that you play inside the lines. Harbaugh's an interesting guy, right? I mean, pregame, you see him slapping shoulder pads of players. I think he wants to smash helmets to head. He would probably do it if it was allowed. What's your relationship like, and what is it like to play with a guy who obviously knows everything about the game and gets, as I said, almost as intense as you guys before the kickoff?
I mean, when you have a coach like Coach Harbaugh, you know, it's hard not to want to go to war for that guy, you know, because he wants to be out there, right? You know, he didn't want his career to be over. Like, I mean, he's still in the game. You know, he wants to, if he could, he would put them shoulder pads on, helmets on in a second, right? So, you know, when you have a coach that loves the game like he does, man, it makes it easy, man. I would go to war with Coach Harbaugh any day. I would do anything for him. I'll run through a brick wall. And so he brings a lot of energy. You know, in warm-ups, you see him just catching balls. Like you said, smacking guys on the shoulders. You know, he's ready. He's fired up. He believes in the preparation that we did the week before. And so, you know, it's easy to play for a coach like that just because he loves the game so much and he loves his players. He's an amazing coach.
Now, Blake Corum said he would run through brick walls. He is running through proverbial brick walls so far this season, leading the nation in rushing touchdowns, among the nation's leaders in basically every rushing category. Hey, Blake, we really appreciate the time. Know you got to get back to making sure you keep that good weight on in the places that you want it to be. So we appreciate the time, and good luck this week against Indiana.
And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Speaking of tons of fun, Rick Pizzo, Anthony Herron back with one of the most fun segments we do each week here in the Wednesday edition of Big Ten Today, and that being Big Ant's Impact 5. This week, it's the top 5 teams inside the Big Ten. I'm going to tell you right now, I got issue with some of yours at the start of this list, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Start off with number 5.
I'm glad you're so excited about the Impact 5 this week because I am too. It's adjusting. It's changing. Starting in College Park, where Maryland is now in the Impact 5 this week. And it's not because they hadn't been consistent before this moment, but we are seeing a Terp squad that now, after being tested on the road in Ann Arbor and going toe-to-toe with Michigan, they played a clean game. As clean a game, one penalty flag that they had against Michigan. That's the most clean game Maryland's played the entire season, but they responded in the following week, and that showed me something about that Terp squad, that they were able to maintain a level of consistency that's been sort of the hallmark of what Mike Locksley has been trying to build there with that team. And you look at the offense, I don't even think they're really reaching their peak yet. The productivity of some of those deep wide receivers, Talia Tagovailoa as a quarterback, can throw the ball even more effectively, which seems like an odd thing to say for one of the most statistically spectacular QBs in the country, but I believe they can be even better.
And remember, I know a football game is 60 minutes. Maryland played Michigan dead even for 59 minutes and 54 seconds. Trouble was,
right.
They fumbled the opening kickoff, and Michigan scores on the first play in Ann Arbor from that time on. 27-all. I'm with you. I love Maryland inside the 5. Not sure, maybe you could have had them maybe a tad higher. Who's number 4?
So number 4 for me is a team. I actually did have these. When I talked about this on Big Ten Radio earlier in the week, I had them flipped, but I am going to put the Illini at number 4. And a part of it is what I was referencing earlier with that Illinois offense, the versatility they bring to the table. Tommy DeVito as a quarterback, what he's done to stabilize a passing attack that showed precision, a lot of back shoulder throws that were a part of the passing attack that they hadn't shown earlier in the season. They can vary tempos, and we know what Chase Brown and that rushing attack are doing even without Josh McCray back. But they've got a potential Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year candidate on the interior of that defense as well in Johnny Newton. So when you have that up front and when you have the immense sort of tenacity of that secondary, a guy like Kendall Smith can just sort of be in the background as far as, you know, public notoriety, an unheralded player. Happens to lead the Big Ten in interceptions as a safety also. So they just at every level can get it done.
No, and I'm giving you grief, but I agree with you. I would also have Illinois slightly higher than Maryland just because I give a lot of credit to road wins. And I know that Wisconsin is a team that is in a little bit of a crisis right now. But to go up to Madison, a tough place to play where your program hadn't won in 2 decades, and do what Illinois did this past weekend certainly deserves some credit.
Yeah, they caused the crisis partly, you know, when they got
Pretty sure
there.
I know where you're going with each of your top 3, so let's start at number 3.
And doing that, we'll go to State College because Penn State is a team that, you know, they're going to have this opportunity now to lick a few wounds. And in doing that, with this bye week that they're going to have, I think the wounds that they may lick aren't necessarily even physical. It's just a team that had a tough schedule early in the season. Penn State's just a squad that were on the road in hostile environments multiple times, found a way to come out with wins, and then learn some things about themselves along the way as well. Learn that maybe they're deeper at quarterback than people like myself thought with Drew Aller looking ready for prime time. They found a run game as well, and that's going to be an exceptional benefit to Sean Clifford moving forward. No surprise, though, whether it's Manny Diaz and Anthony Poindexter in the way that they lead that defense and that secondary, the depth and talent they have on that side of the football, and the aggression where they just pillage the village on every snap with that Manny Diaz blitz package. It's a fun defense to watch, and they're doing it at a high level.
Now, that guy we saw over your shoulder when we took the good-looking one shot of Anthony Herron, Jair Brown, may just be the best defensive back in the country. He just makes plays all over the field, and I love Nicholas Singleton. I got to see him when I called their spring game, and you could see there was something
He's just
special.
a blur, right?
And now with Katron back there, they have a little bit of a 1-2 punch in a run game that they've been talking about, James Franklin and Mike Yurcich, wanting to have for a couple of years. So at number 2, I hate to ruin your surprise, but I know it's going to be Michigan. This is the defending Big Ten champ. They're still unbeaten, and yet you're not ready to say that they overtake Ohio State this year.
There's a lot, I think, when you compare the Wolverines and the Buckeyes, a lot of similarities where Michigan can run the football. Michigan can spread you out with talent and playmakers on the outside. Michigan certainly has a defense that maybe had a few unproven commodities, but see a bunch of guys like Mike Morris, coming off the edge, making plays for the Wolverines, and a playmaking secondary. They are more unproven at QB, and that's what, to me, separates them at the moment. But I don't have an issue with the way J.J. McCarthy's playing right now. You know how hostile an environment it can be at Kinnick Stadium. To be able to go on the road to Iowa City and on the line of scrimmage, that's really where Michigan led the way against the Hawkeyes. But there's a control to the way that J.J. McCarthy's playing the game that goes beyond his years, that goes beyond his experience. Frankly, that goes beneath his athleticism and playmaking ability, but that's key for the Wolverines because he's not sort of pressing the envelope every time he gets behind center, and they don't need him to at the moment. So we'll get to the point where maybe he puts on the Superman cape and starts to make some of those wild plays we saw last year, but he doesn't need to, and I love the fact that he's not forcing it.
Last year he forced, this year 0. That's the most important number for J.J. McCarthy. Right. 0 interceptions. He is throwing the ball to the right color jersey and allowing the pieces around him to do what they need to do. And of course, at number 1, Ohio State, the offense is exactly what we expected, except Travion Henderson misses last week. Jackson Smith-Njigba's barely played this year, and they're still lighting up opposing defenses.
And they're doing it with the ground attack. I mean, maybe the passing yardage is down a bit for C.J. Stroud this season. I'm cool with that. I've been talking about that since last season. Lean on that offensive line. Push folks around with that ground attack. It makes life easier for the individual who's over my shoulder right now. C.J. Stroud is still going to have all kinds of touchdown passes, but it enhances the efficiency of Ohio State's offense when you are willing to lead with physicality, to choose violence on the field with that Buckeye rushing attack and Mayan Williams, and when Travion Henderson comes back healthy. That's what they've been doing so far this season, and I think it's part of why Jim Knowles' defense has gotten better and better every single week because they take the field with energy, they play downhill at their opponents, and schematically, it feels to me like they're only doing so much up to this point that they've only needed to not necessarily unleash the entire Jim Knowles playbook.
So I'm not sure that there can be a lot of disagreement with the 5 teams that you have.
Oh, Pat's going to find a way.
Maryland, Illinois, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. Pat Anthony thinks you're going to be contrarian no matter what he says, so you can go ahead and prove him right or prove him wrong.
I feel compelled, and it also comes a bit naturally for me to be a bit of a contrarian here. So, yeah, I would just say this. I will give Minnesota a pass for last week, and I would slot them in there at number 5. Mo Ibrahim's their best player, the most important guy. If he doesn't play, that hurts him. If he comes back, I think Minnesota still has a very bright season ahead of them. So that would be my quibble there. The only other thing, just based on resume, you can make an argument Penn State should be ahead of Michigan, perhaps. 2 good road wins that we've talked about, Purdue and Auburn. The one thing, though, I was there for Michigan, Iowa, and got to see Michigan with my own eyes, and boy, that does look like a very good team. I mean, they handled the atmosphere, they handled the opponent, they really dominated that game, let their foot off the pedal a little bit at the end, so Probably I would keep Michigan at number 2 and not slide them to number 3, but you could make an argument for Penn State there.
I think it's fair. It's a fair point about Minnesota because I really do think the Gophers are still going to be an excellent team. I sat here with you, I think it was leading into week 0 or something, Rick, and I said Minnesota is my choice in the Big Ten West coming into the season. I still feel like that's the choice at the moment. But on the whole, yeah, they had a bad day. They're taking one down. They're singing a sad song.
No.
But they're still going to be fine this year.
No, Michigan, Pat, should not be anywhere lower than 2. No. Not after going to the place that, as Jim Harbaugh said, top 5 teams go to die. Everybody had Iowa in the upset special.
Yeah.
Michigan picks up the win. Man, here's a tough question. What's the best quarterback-running back duo inside the Big Ten? Would you say C.J. Stroud and Mayan Williams, a combined 26 touchdowns this year? Mayan Williams wasn't even the number 1 running back for the Buckeyes heading into this season. That's how good the quarterback-running back duos have been this season inside the Big Ten. So we ask Pat Forde and Anthony Herron to take on an impossible task and rank the top 3 from 3 to 1 running back-quarterback duos inside the Big Ten. Pat, you're first up. Ready, set, go.
Yeah, okay, I'm starting in Champaign with Tommy DeVito and Chase Brown. Chase Brown, best back in the league, best back in the country for my money. He has carried the offense. They've been able to build around him, but also give credit to Tommy DeVito and what he's been able to do. Career highs in passing efficiency right now, yards per game. He's flourishing, as Anthony said. They put him behind a good offensive line, and he's getting plays done. So I'm starting there. Then, number 2, I got to go to Michigan with J.J. McCarthy and with Blake Corum. I was at the game again at Iowa, and Jim Harbaugh said afterwards that J.J. McCarthy reminds him of a young Jimmy Harbaugh. Loves to just freelance plays and make things happen, but he's also avoiding mistakes. As you guys noted, and in that game, that was the most important thing he could do. Blake Corum, it's Big Ten time. He's the man. 59 carries so far in 2 games. He can carry the rock. He can get tough yards in the middle. He can beat you on the edge. Great running back, very versatile. Then you got to start at number 1 with Ohio State there. Obviously, C.J. Stroud, he and Hendon Hooker right now are leading my Heisman ballot. I'm not sure who I'd put number 1 there. And then back of the week, whoever it is, whether it's Mayan Williams, whether it's Travion Henderson, it doesn't matter. They're both productive, so they can make that offense go 2 ways with the run game, no matter who's there, and C.J. Stroud with the pass game. Really good back receiver combos, back quarterback combos in the Big Ten.
All right, so Pat got contrarian with you early in the show. Now it's your turn to turn the table.
Well, I would say that there's some agreement here, but I do think at the number 3 slot is where I would take some issue because Minnesota is still there. Minnesota's still going to play at a high level. And the reason they're going to be able to do that is going to be because of Tanner Morgan and, assuming health, Mohamed Ibrahim. If he was that close to being able to play in the game last week, he's out there warming up, his ankle couldn't quite go, then let's assume Mo Ibrahim returns to the lineup sooner than later. You got one of the best backs in America. You got one of the most experienced quarterbacks in America who was back to playing at an extremely high level when Mo Ibrahim was on the field. I would put Tanner Morgan and Mohamed Ibrahim there at number 3. For me, number 2, I'll go to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I do see now more of a proven commodity in J.J. McCarthy. I take a wait-and-see approach with these young football players. It's kind of my thing. It's a part of my brand, but I am seeing more and more him maintaining control, enhancing his calm, and then, of course, like you talked to Blake Corum earlier, as impressive off the field as he is
so
on
much
the field. So I love what his potential brings to the table, and that's even without Donovan Edwards, necessarily being fully back into the lineup yet. And then at number 1, yes, I would go C.J. Stroud and whomever he's handing the football off to, whether it's Travion Henderson, whether it is Mayan Williams. Right now, because Williams is healthy, I'll go with that individual, but that's my number 1 combo also.
Were you surprised, though? I know Rutgers can struggle against an offense like Ohio State, but 5 touchdowns for Mayan Williams, and I got to tell you, some of the cuts he made, I know he was really good last year. Yeah. Much like Blake Corum, he's at a totally different level in 2022.
He certainly is. His game has really taken a big step forward. And I would say this, for Rutgers' defense, they're going to be formidable against most opponents, and it's why I was so impressed with what Ohio State was able to do and their willingness to continue to lead with the ground attack. I just like the mentality that Ryan Day has brought into this season. I was hoping it would be the case. It is exactly playing out as I believe the Buckeyes needed to, where this coach, he grew a beard. He said, you know what, I am gruff now. He's probably wearing flannels around every day, and this is what Ohio State needs to be.
Listen, he told us that they have made a purposeful approach, coaching-wise, to coach with an edge this year because they want the team to understand intensity has to happen every play, 24 hours a day. Usually coaches do that when they see something special. Yeah. I think Ryan Day sees that this year. Always special to be with these guys. For Pat Forde and Anthony Herron, I'm Rick Pizzo. Thanks for hanging out with us on this edition of Big Ten Today.